Hello Internet, today we're going to do a very quick headset service. So we're going to start by removing the front wheel. In my case it is a 6mm. This isn't a video on how to remove a front wheel, so I'm just going to assume you know that much. Now to make this easy on ourselves and to basically stop us having to do anything twice, I'm actually, if possible, instead of removing the brake caliper, I'm actually going to remove the brake lever. The reason for that is it saves aligning the brake up again later, maybe messing around with any cable routing going on there. Now with that lever just hanging loose and obviously securing any bolts and anything that might wobble free, we're going to take apart the headset itself. Now, whilst it is undeniably exciting, the thought of removing this top cap, which is responsible for preloading the whole system, dropping the fork out and letting a million spacers fly everywhere, if you instead get something similar to a 10mm, or just basically a big bar, you can remove the fork and leave that stuff in there. So sometimes the bearing might come out on the crown there, other times it just stays within the frame or the headset cup. We're just going to remove it and give it a quick clean. Now, something that's really important to consider here is how dry the environment is in which you are riding. For instance, grease is really good at resisting water ingress. However, it's also really good at attracting dirt. So if we're riding in a really dry climate for the whole of summer, it's probably best not to go too heavy on the grease. So that's my lower assembly. I'm going to very carefully remove that big 10mm. Try not to drop the spacers everywhere. Then I'm going to look at the upper assembly. So again, just giving them a good wipe down. Now we are recording this, I don't know when it's going to go out, but we're recording it just as summer's nearing its end, and the Pacific Northwest is notable for its very wet autumns. So I'm actually going to put just a lick of grease here. If you've got a frame such as this that doesn't use any headset cups and is instead going straight into the frame, it's worth considering whether you are using carbon safe grease or not. This stuff is, I'm going to just dunk a whole finger in there. What I like to do, just put a light smear. Like I said, this is just to inhibit corrosion as much as anything. I'm going to put a light smear on that fork crown as well. Then I'm going to put the top bearing in. Then just smear around the inside. You don't want to be putting big clags of it on, even if you ride somewhere really wet. Like, it's only to stop basically bits of rust on the surface. And yes, maybe you could argue that if you put big clumps of it, it could stop water going actually into the bearing itself, but I would argue that's what a good headset's for, that level of sealing. Then we're going to drop the bearing onto there. As we look at reinstalling the fork, it's always worth thinking about what your cable's going to be doing. Now you want a nice secure hand there, just hold it still. And we're going to very simply just go through reinstalling the bits. Now, this should be a nice, simple process. And all of these parts, they want to be pretty clean. Little bits of dust can actually kind of be crushed over and over again by these spacers as the bike twists and flex. And sometimes that can be the noise. It's not actually anything to do with your bearings. It's just bits of dirt between something as innocuous as two spacers. I'm going to put that back on. And assuming your headset bearings aren't worn, a headset service, it's kind of as simple as that really. It's really important to check for wear, really important to inspect the areas for any damage, but if they haven't, you can actually, get lots and lots more life out of your bike, have it run quieter by just doing this little cleanup. I like to put a little dab of grease just on these threads here. It doesn't need to be much. And also it doesn't need to be, as you can imagine, as the bolt spins, it will carry the grease around the threads on all its sides. What we're gonna do is we're gonna nip this up. Not going crazy, because we're gonna come back to it in a minute anyway to double check it. With all the controls back on, we're gonna go about reinstalling the wheel. And I know what you're thinking, that I haven't done up the all important stem bolts there. And you're right. And that's for good reason, because we're gonna preload the system and line the handlebars when the bike is out of the stand. Now, here is where we take care of the preload and stem bolts. Now, what we don't want to do is do our preload when our bars are turned, because as we bring them back to center, it can add or reduce tension. So we want to get them roughly straight. It doesn't have to be exact, but roughly straight. If you're sensible, note that I am not. You'll be using a torque wrench here. But if you're reasonably experienced, you should be okay. But if in doubt, use a torque wrench. So that's nipped up. We can just double check there's no play there. And then what we're going to do is think about lining this up. Short stem isn't necessarily conducive to helping getting that front wheel lined up, especially when you have things like mud guards on. However, what short stems are very good for is letting the bars be very easily lined up with the fork crowns. And that's what we're going to do. So we're going to line it up this way with the bar and the crowns, not this way. And then we're just going to make sure these are done up. So it's really important that we go 1, 2, 1, 2 with these. So do one bolt up until you think it's about right. Then you go back to the other bolt, and you may well find that because they share the load, that bolt feels a little bit looser than you remember, but that's okay. Just going to keep going back and forth between them. And that's it. Hey presto, that is a headset ready to see another run. And it's that simple. Like I said, experiment with the level of grease you use depending on your environment for best results. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.